Hi guys, I hope you're doing well. I hope everything is going well with you. So I'm just going to check where we are on this on the live stream. Let's just make sure it's working. Um, let's just make sure it's working. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. So how's it going? How are you guys? Can you hear me okay? Are you all able to hear me? Um, let's just find it. Okay. Yeah. Don't know why I can't see everyone. We are live. Okay. Um, let's have a look. Oh, excellent. Yeah, we can. You can hear me. All right. So there's a delay on the line. There's always a delay on these things, but I'm just checking to see how many people are watching. Okay, we've got around 64 people. That's okay. You know, that's not. But I know a lot of people are gonna uh, log on later or look at the recording later. So that's cool. Okay, and brilliant. Okay, I think we're good. We're good. So we're slowly loading up our numbers. Um, right. Okay. You can see and hear a face. Thank you very much. That's good. Right. Okay. So how are you guys doing? Because I put a timer on. I'm becoming more and more authoritarian. Oh, what's happened to my video? Why has my video suddenly gone bad? Give me a second. I'm going to try to fix that. Okay, guys, I'm going to have to reboot my computer. So after all of that, I'm going to have to reboot my computer. So talk amongst yourselves, and I will come back in a second. So give me a second. This is not making good TV, is it really? Right, can you hear me? I hope you can hear me now because that was my computer went dead. But if you can hear me, just put a comment in the comment section while I set up my slides once again. Again, my apologies about that. I will have to cut this out of the video because it doesn't make very good TV. But yes, just give me a second while I do that. Um, Brilliant, excellent. You can hear me. Fantastic. Right, I'm going to set up my slides again, and we'll talk about today. And let's share the screen, share a window. Blimey, we're sharing that. Excellent. Okay, brilliant. You can now see my screen. My screen. Patel is protected in the hood. Exactly, I am. You can hear me, boss. That's good. I haven't read any of your questions so far because I've had this problem with my computer. So okay, you guys are talking about other things. Yeah, U.S. politics. I'm afraid I'm not doing U.S. politics today. I'm not doing U.S. politics at all, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry, guys, but I just don't have the time at the moment. And you guys were doing quite well. I mean, predictions wise, we did quite well, didn't we, in the last two exams? I mean, the unit component two, I think there was a pathway through UK government. You know, there were two questions that were effectively done, the source and the non-source. So I think that paper two was pretty good. And paper one, I think, was good as well, or sweet, as you guys say, in the hood. So let's get through this. I know it's 10 o'clock, and Mint Rose is very tired. So I appreciate we shouldn't stay up too long because of that. But let's try to get through this. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Um, Good. Right. So I'm going to now go through global politics and what I think will come up. Now, please excuse me. I haven't actually done a lot of work on this because partly because I've just been so busy the last few days. So I'm doing this because a lot of you contacted me and said that you want me to do it, and a lot of you used the term goat and lion, and I'm a sucker for that type of compliment. So I thought, okay, let's do this. Now remember, you've got a number of topics in global politics. You've got 6 topics in total, and we're going to start with comparative theories, which is of course the 12 marker. So you get one compulsory 12 marker. In fact, it's the only question in all of your politics exam papers which doesn't have a choice. So it's the only non-choice question you get, and that comes in component 3 in the paper 3. Now with comparative theories, here's what's come up already. So no, in fact, here's what's come up already. So how do realists and liberals explain the likelihood of war and conflict? Right. Um, uh, Analyze the difference between the realist concept of security dilemma and the liberal concept of complex interdependence. Analyze the divisions that exist between realists and liberals over the impact of both international organizations and the significance of states. So there were security dilemma and complex interdependence, international organizations and the significance of states. Analyze the differences that exist between realists and liberals in the ways they view nature, human nature and power. This was a question I predicted the previous year. So it wasn't last year, it was a year before. And lastly, you had analyzed the different explanations which realism and liberalism provide for recent developments in global politics, right, since 2000. So how do realists and liberals, in other words, account for global politics since 2000? So these are the questions that have come up already. Now, I'm looking at so I've got a question bank that I've got up on Amazon, which which a lot of people get. Let me find the page. So what has come up already? Well, we've had, if we look at the specification, human nature and power has come up. That international organizations and the significance of state has come up. The security dilemma has come up. Complex interdependence has come up. Conflict has come up there. And then they've had a question on this section here, which, by the way, they hadn't had until last year, an evaluation of the extent to which realism and liberalism explain recent developments since 2000 in global politics, right? So they've covered this box here. They've covered some of that, they've covered some of that, and they've covered some of that. What they haven't covered is this box here completely. So my best bet is you'll get a question on the anarchical society and the society of states theory, which I'm not going to go through today, but it's not realism and liberalism. It's a separate theory. That's my best bet. I think that they're due to ask that question. They've covered, in other words, these boxes here quite extensively. They've covered that once. They've not covered this at all, 6.4, right? Now, some of you worry about this because you've not been taught what the anarchical society theory is. And that's a problem because it's not realism, although some people mistaken it for realism. And if you get an anarchical society theory question, it will probably be, let me find it, it will probably be this question here. Where is it? In fact, let me just find it on my slides. It's not that one. Give me a second. 1 second. Oh, where is it? Yeah, here we go. Analyze the main ideas of the anarchical society and the society of states theory and how it differs to realism and liberalism. I think that's a question that can come up. Now, I'm afraid that we don't have time to talk about it, but I'll flash up the plan on it'll be a 12 marker. I'll flash up the plan, but we spoke about it on our in the session we did since January. So if you guys want to access that, you can access my course that I did since January. But yeah, we talked about how to answer this question. Don't be mistaken, it's not a realism question. It's a anarchical society sits in between realism and liberalism. So my best bet is if that 12 marker, you will probably get this question. Now, you may get this question. If not this year, then next year, you may get that question, right? Now, let me just flash up for those of you who want a plan. I'm just going to go through it, and you're going to have to take screenshots of this now, or you're going to have to take screenshots later. So that's the first, that's the second, and that's it, right? So you could possibly get a question like that, right? You don't need 2 for and a 2 against. That's not how you do the 12 markers. For a 12 marker, you just need to have 2 or 3 paragraphs without an introduction and without a conclusion. I've got an entire video on this on my YouTube page, so you can have a look at that. But I suppose your first paragraph would be, how does the anarchical society theory differ to realism? And your second paragraph would be, how does it differ to liberalism? And maybe you can get away with 2 paragraphs, right? You can have a third paragraph that maybe explains how it's different to realism and liberalism together. I don't know. But I think 2 paragraphs will be sufficient, right? Gurveer, you don't need 2 for and 2 against, no, or 3 for, and it's a 12 marker. You don't have enough time to do 2 and 2. For a 12 marker, you just need to have 2 points, 2 paragraphs, right? And those paragraphs answer the question directly. So what are the main ideas and how does it differ to realism and liberalism? I think that's how you do it, right? So that's the first question I think you may get in your exam. How does that sound so far, right? Okay, if you get an extra paper, use extra paper. It doesn't get marked by a different examiner. That's a very silly idea, really. Okay, what else can come up? Well, so they've had a question on security dilemma and liberal interdependence. They've had a question here on human nature and power. They've had a question on intergovernment, international organization, significance of states. So if we go back to this, they haven't asked a question on states as actors in global politics and the balance of power. So they haven't asked a question on that. Neither have they asked a question on morality and optimism and morality. They've asked a question on human nature, but I haven't asked a question on morality. So guys, what I'm doing here is I'm just sort of pointing out the things that you've got to be thinking about. Make sure you can answer at least part of a 12 marker. Say if the 12 marker was, evaluate or analyze the views of realism when it comes to states in global politics, and when it comes to the possibility of harmony and balance, right? Realism and liberalism when it comes to states in global politics and a possibility of harmony and balance. That can be a question as well. Again, I haven't written this down, guys, so you're going to have to take notes, right? So analyze the realist and liberal views of states as key actors in global politics, and the possibility of harmony and balance. That's a plausible question. Yeah, maybe someone should write these down and put it in the chat later on. But that's right. Right. You could get a question on the inevitability of war, right? Because we haven't actually had a question on the inevitability of war. So the question could be analyze the realists and liberals when it analyze the realist concept of inevitability of war and the liberal concept of again harmony and balance, or the likelihood of global governance even, right? So it could ask you a question about inevitability of war. Yeah, I think those are the questions, because they haven't come up already. Those are the questions that could be asked. What else is there? Yeah, this question here: order and security and the likelihood of conflict, right? So we haven't had. We have how do realists and liberals explain the likelihood of war and conflict? So we have had that question before. But you could have a question on how do realists and liberals explain order and security as a question. So that's a third question. How do realists and liberals explain order and security? Yeah. Okay, so that's a possible question. How's this looking? Nora, are you writing these down? I know Nora's with us. Nora, are you noting these down? And maybe you can explain it to, or you can put them on the channel later. Do let us know if you are. So again, my apologies. I haven't put this down, on a piece of paper, but that's a possible question you can get, right? And as I said, you could get a question on anarchical society, and that's my best bet. I think you can get a question on anarchical society. So where are we here? We are basically suggesting that the question could focus on states as key actors and state sovereignty. A question can focus on, maybe international anarchy and its implications. A question could focus on the significance of morality, right? A question could focus on the possibility of harmony and balance. So that's a liberal idea. So remember, that's half a question, the possibility of harmony and balance. A question could focus on the order and security here, right? Or a question could be on an anarchical society of states idea. So if there's not a repetition of a question, which I don't think there will be, these are the types of questions that could come up in the second in the comparative theories question. How does that all sound to you? You're writing them down. Thank you, Nora. Thank you for writing them down. So I think that's really where I'm thinking. Now, what I'm saying by this is, remember, they can pick a point from here and they can pick a point from here in one question. So they could ask the question, analyze states as a realist position on states as key actors and the liberal position of morality, right? So they could pick and choose from those two, right? One from there and one from there. Does that make sense? Right, Nora. And then you could get an anarchical society question. And as Nora knows, it's a completely different question to that, right? Nora's going to write this down in the chat at some point, so don't worry about it. I'm not going to repeat it all, but Nora's going to write this down, right? But you should all be taking notes here, guys. Good. Any top tips on 12 markers? Sarah asks, just look at my video on how to answer a 12-mark question, and it's pretty self-explanatory, right? I have got here some possible questions. I haven't ranked them in any way because I just haven't had time, But again, you can take a screenshot of this as a question bank that can help you to work on. If you want to get a question bank, I mean, I do have this book, but you don't have to get this book from Amazon. But if you want a more detailed question bank, I've got that there. Great. Okay. So I think these are your comparative theory questions. Shall we move on? Let's move on. Yeah, so a lot of questions are being asked. What's the difference between anarchical society? I've given you the screenshot, so you're going to have to read through that. So please do that in your own time. Right. Let's look at human rights and environment. Human rights and the environment. Now, in human rights and environment, what's already come up, evaluate the extent to which human rights are more effectively protected by humanitarian intervention than by international courts and tribunals. That's a 30 marker. Evaluate the extent to which global governance is concerned with economic issues over human rights issues. So it's a global governance, economic and human rights. So it crossed global governance, economic, global governance, and human rights. Evaluate the view that environmental issues have received greater attention than economic issues in global politics. An okay question, but again, it's crossing economic, global governance, and environment. Evaluate the view that a trend away from globalization and regionalism would place a greater emphasis on state sovereignty and thus hinder the promotion of human rights. Horrible question. I don't think they'll repeat a question like this, but it's a pretty horrible question. Evaluate the view that global governance through the UN has addressed human rights issues more successfully than environmental concerns, right? So human rights is more stressed than environmental issues. Examine the difference between, it's a 12 marker. Examine the difference between the ICJ and the ICC. That's come up. Evaluate the view that global governance through the UN has addressed human rights issues more successfully than environmental concerns. That was last year, right? So there was evaluate the view that global governance through the UN has addressed human rights issues more successfully than environmental concerns. And that did come up last year. I think that came up last year. Although, why am I doubting myself now? Just give me a second. I'm fairly sure that came up last year. Oh, my screen is covering some of the questions. Oh, what am I doing? How's that happening? Oh, okay, I get you. My let me move that over. Give me a second. Yeah, I've moved it. Brilliant. Okay, so that's what. So you've had a mixture of, on the issue of human rights and environment, you've had quite a big mix of questions. So you've had a question here on ICJ and ICC, right? You've had a question here on, you've had a question here on, yeah, yeah, maybe you don't need, there won't be a question on that. You've had a question here on humanitarian intervention and its growth. We've had something on that. Reasons for selective interventionism. Maybe there's been a question on that, or maybe not. Examples of alleged Western double standards and hypocrisy. There hasn't been a question on that, right? So possibly you could get a question on the double standards and hypocrisy of the international community when it comes to human rights. So I've got a question here in my book, and the question is: evaluate the extent to which states, is question 9 on page 35. Evaluate the extent to which states selectively apply the doctrine of responsibility to protect and international intervention because of their self-interests. Right, so states do it because of their self-interests. There was also another direct question, which was, evaluate the view that, here we go, let's have a look. Yeah, it's something like, evaluate the view that states only care for human rights when it comes to their own self-interests, right? States only care about human rights when it comes to their self-interests. That's another question that could come up in the exam, because I haven't asked about the double standards and the hypocrisy. uh, or evaluate the view that that human rights are not protected in the world, and the West remains hypocritical in its application of human rights, right? So, or the West has double standards when it comes to its application on human rights. So you could have a question on that. Nora's putting the questions together as we speak, right? So you could get a question about, Nora, is everything okay? Are you happy with what I've said so far? Are you scribing this down? Um, Excellent. Okay. Brilliant. There has been a question, as I said, on environment. So the ways in which the extent to which these institutions address and resolve contemporary global issues. Oh, sorry, environment. There's been a question on the environmental conferences in the past, but you may get a straightforward question. And the straightforward question could be, evaluate the view that global conferences on environment are doomed to fail. Evaluate the view that global conferences, or evaluate the extent to which global conferences on the environment are doomed to fail. The extent to which global conferences on the environment are doomed to fail. I think that's a possible question that can come up as well. Yeah. All of this will be available on the channel later, D. And Nora is going to publish these, and I'll pin it. It'll be the first comment on the chat, right? So I think the doom to fail question is good, and there is a good model answer to it on my website, so you can have a look at that model answer. You could get a question on how the extent to which the UN has dealt. The extent to which these institutions that have been mentioned there, the European Court of Justice, the European International Courts, for example, the extent to which these institutions work, right? So that's a possible question. I think you could get, like, how much do these institutions work? I don't know. I mean, it could be, evaluate the view that the environmental and human rights institutions have failed to resolve to meet their objectives, right? Evaluate the extent to which the institutions that are responsible for protecting human rights and safeguarding the environment have failed to achieve their objectives. And in that question, you would have to talk about the UN frameworks on environment, and you would have to talk about those various institutions that are responsible for protecting human rights. And they're all mentioned here, right? Good. Yes. Debate how the effectiveness and implication of state sovereignty and extent to which international law is accepted and enforced. Yeah, that's not a bad question. So, you know, again, it's a similar question to the last one, but the question here is, evaluate the extent to which state sovereignty disables the application of international law when it comes to human rights and the environment. Evaluate the extent to which state sovereignty hinders the safeguarding of human rights and the environment, right? So state sovereignty, environment, and human rights, that could come up as a question. Yeah. Good. Right. They haven't yet had a question, if I'm not mistaken, on shallow green ecology versus deep green ecology, a 12 marker. I mean, these will be 12 markers, right? So you could get a question on examine the difference between shallow green ecology and deep green ecology, right? So you could get a 12 marker on that. I mean, that's a possible 12 marker. Yeah. No, so you've said the previous questions I mentioned have all been 30 markers. I'm now just sort of pointing out that you can get a 12 marker on this, shallow green versus deep green ecology. Oh yes, they haven't asked a question yet on the tragedy of the commons. Um, so again, you could get a question on a 12 marker on evaluate. Sorry, examine the ideas of sustainable development and the tragedy of commons. So make sure you know what sustainable development means and the tragedy of commons means. So you could get a 12 marker on those two concepts, right? Or tragedy of the commons could be put into a question, a 30 marker. So for example, I've got here, evaluate the extent, question 7 in my book, page 35. Evaluate the extent to which the tragedy of the commons adequately explains international action on climate change. The tragedy of the commons adequately explains international action on climate change. So again, that's a very plausible question that you can get in your exam. So all I'm doing here at the moment is I'm just going through bits of the spec they haven't really talked about, and I'm giving you questions on those, right? As I said, you could have a question on the strengths and weaknesses of international agreements. So, you know, it could be specific agreements. So, for example, you could get a 12 marker, and this is possible, by the way, on Rio, Kyoto, Copenhagen, or Paris, right? I don't know if you'll get a 12 marker on Glasgow because I think it isn't mentioned here specifically in the specification, but I would try to learn a little bit about Glasgow and Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt as well. So I would probably want to know a bit about that. But you could get a 12 marker on, you know, examine the strengths and weaknesses of two international conferences on climate change. I think that's a fairer question, by the way, than a question on, uh, um, you know, a question on like two of these conferences. I think it'd be wrong for them to say, you know, examine the strengths and weaknesses of Rio and Kyoto. I don't think that's a good question, but I think they may say examine the strengths and weaknesses of two international conferences on climate change, right? So you can get that, right? Yes. Obstacles to international cooperation and agreement, including sovereignty, developed versus developing world. Yeah, yes, yes. So you could get a question about developed and developing world on the environment. So evaluate the extent to which the developed and developing world have fundamentally different views about environmental or dealing with environmental issues. So something about developed versus the developing world, right? So you could get a question about that. It could be a 12 marker. Examine the arguments of the developed and the developing world when it comes to environmental issues. So that could be a 12 marker as well. It's more likely to be a 12 marker than a 30 marker. Uh, uh, good. Okay. Um, yeah. Um, yeah. This is a tough one at the bottom there, and I did put a question forward for it. And the question is question 18 in the book. Evaluate the extent to which the answer to climate change will primarily come from non-state actors, NGOs, and global civil society rather than the actions of states. Right? So, you know, climate change action will come primarily from non-state actors, NGOs, and global civil society rather than the actions of governments or the actions of states, right? And that's a very possible question you can get in your exam, and that's that last one there. Are you guys okay at the moment? Is this? I know this is a little abstract, guys, and I appreciate it. But again, I've just had no time to put this together. But I'm working out what I think could come up in the exam. So all of those questions which Nora's going to put into the chat could possibly come up. Um, uh, yes, excellent. Sounds good. Thank you. Some of you are a bit lost, but fair enough. Uh, It's making you panic. Okay, no, don't panic, because a lot of this is overlaps. Once you sort of learn about environment and human rights, it sort of all fits together. But yes, um, I did a number of. I mean, I've done tons of essays here actually on human rights and the environment. You know, so there's tons of stuff here. Like for example, here we go. Evaluate the view that international conferences on climate change are doomed to fail. That's a plan that I did, and I did that by conferences. I planned it by conferences, right, rather than by themes. And I think that's an easy way to do it. So you look at three conferences, or you look at Glasgow and Paris, and then you look at some previous conferences. So that's a very possible question you can get. Um, yeah, evaluate the extent to which the promotion of human rights is a primary driver of Western states. Like Western states primarily look at the promotion of human rights. Is that the thing that drives them? And you can link that to um, other things that may be higher than human rights on Western states' agendas, right? So anyway, that's some examples there. Great. I mean, what have I got? Yeah. So that's human rights and environment. Now, global governance, political and economic, right? So global governance, political and economic. Um, what's already come up? Examine the criticisms that have been made of the World Trade Organization and the G7, G8. Yeah, the World Trade Organization and the G7, G8. Evaluate the extent to which the rise of the UN has made soft power more significant than hard power in global politics. So again, that's a UN question. Examine, that's a 12 mark, and the criticisms that have been made both of the ICC and the special UN tribunals. Evaluate the extent to which global governance is concerned with economic issues over human rights issues, and evaluate the view that regional bodies have had more impact on contemporary global issues than the IMF, World Bank, and the WTO, which is a horrible question, actually. But it's basically saying that the EU and ASEAN are far more important than the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO. That's what that question is asking. Uh, Fantastic. Um, there's an imposter here, by the way. Um, Ayla, there's a guy calling himself Jal Patel in the chat who is an imposter. Uh, Mr. Patel eyebrow brow raise. What does that mean? Okay, I don't do U.S. politics, I'm afraid. So U.S. politics, guys, you have to cut your losses, because I'm not going to do U.S. politics this year. Brilliant. Okay, so how we doing so far? Everyone okay? So let's talk about what can come up in. So again, look, they've had a mixture of questions. So I can't. It's a hard one to nail down. Um, they've had a question on. They've had a couple of questions on the UN. What they haven't had is, they haven't had a standard question on the UN. I would do a question on the following. Let me give you it. I would prepare a question. Evaluate the extent to which the United Nations is an outdated institution. Evaluate the extent to which the United Nations is an outdated institution, right? So here we go. Evaluate the view that the UN is an outdated institution. They actually haven't had a question also on the IMF and the World Bank being outdated institutions. Yeah, they sort of had one here, so it's not too far away from that. But they haven't specifically had one just on the IMF and the World Bank, right? Brilliant. This PowerPoint is available on my. You can get it. You can purchase it, the whole thing, and it's like £6 or something. You can just get it, and they're slide by slides. You can get that on my website. It's actually in the show notes, so you can have that. So you haven't learned the UN? Well, you know, that's your call, but you do need to learn the UN, I would suggest, in the next few days. Um, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Evaluate the extent to which Bretton Woods system continues to provide stability for the world economy. So by Bretton Woods, of course, we mean the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO. So, but all three of these organizations continue to provide stability for the world economy. Yeah. No, Tommy, the plans alone, I'm saying, the £25 one is the videos. But if you want to get the plans alone, it's not very expensive. Uh, good. Okay. Yeah. Great. Okay. If you don't know about the UN, Rob, I would suggest get my plans and just work through the UN plans that I put up on there. They're very thorough. So you would know about how to know about the UN if you go through those plans. Excellent. Can people stop talking about the USA? The USA is a global hegemon. Right. Power and developments. Right. So what has already come up? A 12 marker on China and India as emerging powers. Evaluate the extent to which globalization has made the world more unipolar rather than multipolar has come up. Evaluate the extent to which the rise of the UN has made soft power more significant than hard power in global politics. Evaluate the extent to which the state system and world order have scarcely changed since 2000, right? Evaluate the view that the EU has become a superpower comparable to the United States. That's more of a regionalism question, to be honest. Examine the differences between democratic and autocratic states in terms of their characteristics and the consequences for global order. So it's a 12 marker on democratic versus autocratic states. And examine the similarities in how democratic and autocratic states impact the global order. Yeah. So again, similarities in how democratic and autocratic states have an impact on global order. Um, these are questions that have already come up. So what could come up? Well, I think a rise of China question could come up. So evaluate the extent to which China has now become a superpower, right? Because you haven't had a direct question, or examine the extent to which China is now an inevitable world power. Um, yeah, yeah, you can get. There was a question that someone flagged up here. Evaluate the view that NATO has become an outdated institution. No, I don't think you'll get a question on NATO in the global governance power, global governance politics and economics. I think NATO can come up as a 12 marker, but as a standalone 30 marker, there's not enough to write. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't think that you would get a 30 marker on NATO. NATO could be part of evaluate the extent to which political global governance has failed. And then there you would bring in UN and NATO. So you can bring it into a 30 marker, but I think you wouldn't get a standalone question on NATO as a 30 marker. I don't think that would really work. Um, Fantastic. All right, there's some year 12 students here who haven't even started global politics. So yeah, you can get a China question. You could get a question on evaluate the extent to which the US is a power in decline, right? Evaluate the extent to which the US is a power in decline. I think that's a very plausible question. So you can get a China can now be viewed as a superpower. I think that's a good question that you could get. But also you could get um, yeah, actually that's a good question. Evaluate the extent to which the spread of democracy, the rule of law, and liberal economics are in decline, right? That's a really tough question, actually. Evaluate the extent to which the spread of democracy, the rule of law, and liberal economics is in decline. I think that's a question. You can get a question, evaluate the view that America is a power in decline, as I said. And that's a possible question, right? What else hasn't come up? Well, there have been plenty of hard and soft power questions. There have been questions about superpower, and emerging powers have come up as 12 markers. You could probably get a question on Evaluate the extent to which, and I should look at my question bank here. Um, da, 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 where are we? I'm so tired today as well. Yeah, here we go. Evaluate the extent to which the US remains a global hegemon. Um, evaluate the extent to which a unipolar world creates a peaceful and ordered world. That's a possible question. That unipolarity, because they haven't asked a question about unipolarity yet. So evaluate the extent to which unipolarity, a unipolar world order, can create a peaceful and ordered world. And that's really saying it's another way of saying evaluate the extent to which the United States has created a peaceful and ordered world. It's a very similar thing, right? And you can break that down into economic, uh, military, and cultural power, right? So you can say that, in these three areas, there's been a more peaceful world, or the world has become less peaceful as a result of the United States unipolarity. Um, uh, yeah, there's another question. Evaluate the extent to which the world has now entered a multipolar era. That's a very plausible question. And it's a similar question to the rise of China, but in that question you could bring the BRICS in rather than just China, so you can talk about other countries that are on the rise. So I think that's very possible. Yeah. um, yeah. You can get a question about any one of these: democratic, semi-democratic, non-democratic, although we did say there was a democratic and autocratic states question before, right? So you could get a question on um, rogue and failed states. Examine the differences between rogue and failed states. That's a possible question. Um, yeah, as I said, that hasn't come up. So I said there could be evaluate the extent to which um, liberal economics and rule of law and democracy has declined in recent years, whatever that question was that I phrased. Where is it? Here we go. Evaluate the extent to which the spread of democracy, rule of law, and liberal economies is in decline. So that's a possible question as well. Um, yes. Yeah. So my point is, you'll get a question on decline, possibly. You get a question on China's rise. You can get a question on we're moving into a multipolar era. Get a question on the stability of a unipolar world. Um, yeah, these are sorts of questions I think. Um, I think you can get. I mean, I got a question here, question 15. Evaluate the extent to which failed states and rogue states thrive in a multipolar world. Rogue states and failed states increase in a multipolar world, right? That's a question that I think I planned in one of my essays, but I think that's a possible question that could come up. Um, okay, excellent. So guys, I'm just running through this as messy as I can. Regionalism and the EU, right? So what's already come up? Evaluate the extent to which regional bodies are effectively able to challenge individual states and influence global politics. Examine the different ways in which political and economic factors have led to regionalism. Evaluate the view that the EU has now become a superpower comparable to the United States. Evaluate the view that regional organizations have eroded state sovereignty. Evaluate the view that regional bodies have had more impact on contemporary global issues than the IMF, World Bank, and WTO. Evaluate the view that countries are more likely to succeed and hold significant power as sovereign states rather than as members of regional organizations. That's what came up last year. So countries can be, Brexit basically. Countries alone are stronger than regional organizations. It's a tough question, but it's a question. It's a question that could be asked, right? Um, so what could come up? Well, I think that's a good question. Evaluate the extent to which the EU has now become an effective international actor. Um, Yes, it's all going to be posted, Beyonce, in the chat afterwards. Evaluate the extent to which regionalism is a response to globalization. That's a possible question that could come up in the exam. Um, I'm looking at page 49, 40, sorry, page 50 here. Um, uh, evaluate the extent, question 8, evaluate the extent to which regionalism undermines state sovereignty. By the way, with these questions, when you answer one or two of these questions, you will find that you've got enough to answer the other questions as well, right? So, yeah, evaluate the extent to which regionalism undermines state sovereignty. That's a very plausible question. Um, or the EU institution erodes state sovereignty. EU erodes state sovereignty. That's a possible question. That could come up. Evaluate the extent to which EU erodes state sovereignty. Question 11 on page 50. Yes. So you could get a very direct question on the EU. Evaluate the extent to which the EU is a failed project, right? The EU is a failed project. That could come up as well. So Nora's writing all of this down, guys. So she will put it in the chat when we finish, right? Yeah. So that's a question that can come up. So just looking at this, I don't think you'll ever get a question, a 30 mark on one of these. You won't get a 30 mark on one of these. So you don't need to know these organizations to that degree, but you could get a question, on, uh, um, evaluate, a question that says examine the similarities between ASEAN and African Union, or the similarities and differences between ASEAN and the African Union. So I would try to make sure I know all of these, right? I will try to make sure I know all of these, right? Um, yeah, great. Um, yeah, yeah. There hasn't actually been a question on this box here. The factors that have fostered EU integration and the major developments that have occurred. So, that's a very possible question. Um, examine, it's a 12 marker, examine the impacts on national states of EU integration and enlargement. Um, you sort of need to know about, I know EU is a bit of a hot, difficult topic, but you sort of need to know about these. Yeah. Yeah, but I would just sort of roughly know what each of these mean, I would say. Yeah. Uh, yeah, we've said that. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just sort of sorry, I'm just flagging to see if there's anything else we need to be aware of. Um, no, I think that's it. I think that's it for regionalism. So make sure you know enough about the EU as a foreign policy actor, maybe the EU as its in its foreign policy. Right, we've got one more section left, and that's the state and globalization. And so, what has already come up? Examine the difference between hyperglobalists and globalization skeptics. Evaluate the extent to which globalization has made the world unipolar rather than multipolar. Evaluate the view that regional organizations have eroded state sovereignty. Evaluate the view that a trend away from globalization and regionalism would place greater emphasis on state sovereignty and hinder the promotion of human rights. The most craziest question I've ever asked is that question there. And I think they've learned that they're not going to ask those sorts of questions again. Evaluate the view that economic globalization has significantly reduced poverty, which, by the way, we looked at quite extensively last year. Economic globalization has reduced poverty, right? So, what could they ask this year? So they've, I've ticked some of the stuff that they've already asked, really. So, um, they can ask a question on the nation state, um, although they've asked about the nation state, right? But the nation state versus globalization, evaluate the extent to, I mean, that was a question last year, to be honest, Not glasses, sorry. That was a question previously. Yeah. Here we go. Evaluate the extent to which. What am I doing? Yeah, maybe that's a regionalism. Yeah, okay. Um, you could get a question then. Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah. So you could get a question about the nation state is in decline. Evaluate the extent to which the nation state is in decline. Yeah, I think that's a possible question. Um, yeah, we sort of have said that. Um, why didn't it? Yeah, yeah. Evaluate the extent to which um, deepening interconnectedness and interdependence is still present in the world. I think that's a very poor way of phrasing it, but it's still present in the world. Um, that's a plausible question. Um, Let me see if I can find a better one. Uh, Sorry, just give me a second. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, yeah. Here we go. Evaluate the extent to which cultural globalization is more significant than political globalization. That's a possible question here. Cultural globalization is more significant than political globalization, or economic globalization is more significant than political globalization. So any one of those three, cultural, economic, and political, has been more significant than another. Um, Evaluate the extent to which globalization is simply Americanization in disguise. Um, uh, Evaluate the extent to which economic globalization benefits a few rather than the many, although that's similar to the poverty question last year, to be honest. So possibly that's a repetition. Evaluate the extent to which globalization has produced a global monoculture. So that's a similar point to the Americanization in disguise. Um, Evaluate the extent to which the impact of globalization has been exaggerated. Yeah, the impact of globalization has been exaggerated. Um, yeah, I mean, these are sorts of similar. To be honest, it's not that globalization is not that hard. I think most globalization questions you will break down into economic, cultural, and political. I think most globalization questions you'll break down into economic, global, and political. Brilliant. So I think that's probably the majority of it. Yeah. I mean, you can evaluate the extent to which conflict thrives in a world of globalization. Conflict thrives in a world of globalization, right? That's a good one. War becomes inevitable in a world of globalization, or war becomes less inevitable in a world of globalization. That's a possible question as well. Um, Yeah. So I've got evaluate the extent to which conflict thrives in a globalized world. Uh, yes. Yeah. Evaluate the extent to which the world is moving away from globalization. That's a possible question as well. The world is moving away from globalization. Right, guys. I'm not sure if my tiredness has made me even sound remotely clever or intelligent today, but I'm just completely knackered. But I think I've just listed a number of questions that I think could possibly come up. I think if you work through plans with those questions, I think you can hopefully. I think you'll find if you work through all of those plans. By the way, and Nora's going to put it in the chat. I think you're going to be fine for this exam. So I will pin Nora's comments, and then just work through all of those questions. I think as long as you work through those questions, you probably can answer most questions that come up. You'll have a pathway through your exam, I think, at least your 30 markers. Um, so that's my best bet. User, don't worry, there's too many to remember, but we're going to put all this in the chat, so don't worry about it. As I said, you can access the slides. Unfortunately, you can purchase them, and you can purchase them via or in the show notes. If you go underneath, you'll see where you can buy that. So plans, these are global politics plans. Yes. So there's a number of questions there. 24 questions Manel has noted down, but some of the questions are overlaps. They're quite similar. How do you structure global politics questions? You structure it like any other question. You structure it like a 30 marker in UK government and politics. Similar structure. Point for, point against, point for against, point for against. Introduction and conclusion. Yeah. That's where we are. Are you guys good? You're cool? Are we cool? As they say on the streets. All good? Yeah. So I do apologize. Now, those of you who have bought my, there were two topics I didn't do in the, we started the thing in January. There are two topics I didn't cover. And so for those of you who bought those, who were with me since January for the global politics, I'm not going to be able to do any more of the sessions. But what I'll do is I will send you for free. I will send you my last year's global politics revision day. So you'll have access to that. And the global politics revision day will give you what you need to know about global politics, right? So, and those two topics will be covered through that. So I hope that makes sense. And yeah, I think we're done. I'm going to sleep. I'm very tired. Good luck, guys. I really appreciate it. Oh, there's one thing I would like you to do me a favor. I would like to do me one favor. And I probably will send this out because I haven't done enough of this in the last few weeks. But I would like you to leave me a review and leave it in, where is it? I'm looking on my website. Yeah, I would like you to leave me a review in on my here we go, on my Trustpilot. Right, so I've actually got a Trustpilot. So in fact, someone left me a review today, which was very nice of them. So I would like you to leave a review here. Let me just share the screen so you can see it. Just give me a second. I would like you to leave me a review. Stop sharing, present, share screen, window. Yeah. Can I ask a favor? Can I ask you to leave a review on uk.trustpilot.com, review alevelpolitics.com? Right. I'll put that in the chat as well. If you can leave a review there, that would be so wonderful. Yeah, someone just left a review 14 hours ago. Great resources. I have the textbook, went to 2 revision days and purchased previous online resources from the website, which helped me tailor my revision. I mean, that was good. These are mostly from last year now. Some great reviews. I got a 4-star review, which, I was quite disappointed with. But it's so good. Then they left me a 4-star review. And, that's just bugged me for the whole year. Why did they leave me a 4-star? It was a year ago, yesterday as well. They left me a 4-star review. Do you believe it? After all I did for them, I would highly recommend. Gosh, what would I have to have done to get a 5-star review from this person? So, I'm not saying that I'm, what's the word? That I'm obsessed with this. But if you can do that, that's fine. Yeah, and user has said it's only £8, and you can look. This is how I make my living. I know some of you are going to say, "But why are you selling this to me, sir?" Well, you don't say that to your teachers. When your teachers teach you, you don't say, "Sir, why are you," or "Miss, why do you have to get a salary for this lesson? Why don't you do it for free?" It's just, unfortunately, it's just my my what do you call it? Just what I'm doing. Anyway, Nora's going to be writing this down. and telling us what the questions are. Teachers' wages are unbelievably low. Yeah, that's true. Um, Mr. Patel, after paper free, do you want to go to Wingstop? Is Wingstop a like a chicken shop? Is that what a Wingstop is? Yeah, why not? Let's all go to Wingstop. Let's do a virtual Wingstop. Um, I will send out that thing today. Um, you know that you wanted. Uh, yeah, it says June 2023 because these all come from June 2023. I didn't update it too much this year, but it will come from June 23. So yeah, that's what it is. Can you do a Wingstop review? I will do a Wingstop review once I'm there. Yeah, once you invite me to Wingstop Cash V, I will do one there. Let's go for biryani. Okay, yeah, biryani's good as well. Uh, yeah, Annie, I sort of listed those questions I think that would come up, and my imposter Jal Patel. You paid and didn't get an email. Just send me an email, jpatel@alevelpolitics.com. Um, I've uncooked a lot of people. Well, that's really good to hear. Um, yeah. Çok teşekkürler ederim. Yeah. I know what that means. What does kendizine iyi bekin? I don't know what that means. Sağ ol. I know what sağ ol means. Um, yes, if you plan these essays, you'll be fine for the exam. Oh, I know Turkish. I lived in Turkey. I lived in Turkey for 6 months. So I know some Turkish. Yeah. But getting rusty, I have to say. But when I go back, it all comes back to me. Uh, you know, teşekkürler. I'm not going to give you US predictions because I don't teach US politics, I'm afraid. I may do it next year, but that's not any help to you guys. Yeah. Can you tell some rogue? Okay, let me just tell you. A rogue state would be North Korea. A rogue state would be Iran. A failed state would be Libya. A failed state would be Somalia. A semi democratic state would probably be India today or Russia. An autocratic state would be China. A democratic state would be, I don't know, Norway. They say take care of yourself. Okay, fine. That's good. Look after yourself. Fantastic. My email, Jal Patel, you should know my email because your name is Jal Patel. Why should I give myself my email address? Mr. Patel, if you don't do the US, you'll be very angry. Well, find me. See if you can find me. Your anger is worthless unless you can track me down. Can you do an all-nighter before the exam? Can I do an all-nighter? No, I'm going to go to sleep. You may want to do one. Yeah. Um, yeah, if you plan these questions, you'll be fine. I'm serious. You plan these questions, you should have a way through the exam. I hope Nora is writing these down. If she isn't, I'm sure. Can I ask if is Nora? Are you writing these down? Have we got Nora? Oh, Nora, I didn't even answer your question. You did send me a notice on WhatsApp. My apologies, Nora. But I think Nora's writing these down. Yeah. Great. Okay. I think we're done. And my email address is jpatel@alevelpolitics.com. Jpatel at A levelpolitics, not alevelpolitics.com. Excellent. Right, guys, I think I've had enough today. I'll see you all hopefully sometime. Well, no, I won't, but I hope to hear from you soon. And I'm going to bed. See you later, guys. Bye. Good luck to you. Good luck to you guys. I'll see you soon. Bye. I'll put the review in the chat. I'll put the review in the chat. Thanks, guys.